This demo is going to go over how to create a kinetic text project in After Effects. So first thing you want to do is download the assets that you should have been given. The main thing we're going to use is just this MP3. And then I'm going to go to After Effects. We're going to create a new project. And first thing you want to do here is create a new composition. And I'm going to call this one Luke I Am, just for the sake of kind of the part in this thing. Now, one of the things you want to do is when you work in After Effects, you want to work in kind of separate compositions and then pull everything into a main. So we're only going to do one small chunk of this spoken word segment, and then normally if I was going to do the previous one or do some stuff afterwards, I would pull these all into a main composition. For this particular demo though, I'm just doing the one. Another thing you can see down here, you can edit your duration. You can also change your background color. I usually leave it just as black. Don't be confused, because if you change this, that color is not actually your background. You still need to create a solid. So when we get in here first, we want to go ahead and import our song or our audio, which you would want to do for any project. I'm then going to go ahead and drop down my MP3 into my composition. Okay. What I want to do now is just hit spacebar and play it.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. He told me enough. He told me you no.
So I'm actually looking for the part where he says no, and that's going to be the beginning of my audio edit. So I'm going to hit the L button twice. Just hit LL. And that's going to bring up my waveforms here so I can see these. And so you can cut this clip two different ways. You could actually go to the beginning and grab the beginning and trim it to that playhead. Another way to do it is you could move your entire thing backwards and trim it off that way. Another way would be Option and left bracket, which makes a beginning cut on a clip. And then you just drag it back, hold down Shift to snap it to the beginning here. So then I should have the no, and then the rest of my audio here. The other thing you can do is hold on Command, and if you hold down Command, you're gonna be able to scrub through and hear your audio, but also be able to see the waveforms. So right here, first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna animate the word. The first thing I'm gonna do is create a solid. So I'm gonna go up to Layer, New, and I'm gonna go down to Solid. And so this solid I'm gonna do is going to be, we'll call it red, and I'm just gonna make a red solid. You can do whatever you want. I'm gonna hit OK, and that's just gonna pop in. And then I'm gonna go to my effects and presets, and I'm gonna look up a vignette. So I'm just gonna VIG, and I'm looking for CC vignette. I drop it on either here to the visual of the red or down here onto that layer. And you can see up in my effect controls, I can change the amounts of that vignette. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of mess with that a little bit. From here, we're gonna start typing our words. So I'm looking for basically where it starts to say the word no. So I'm holding down Command and scrubbing, so right about there. I'm gonna mark that with my playhead. You might wanna zoom in using this slider down here just to kind of get everything perfect. And I'm gonna go up to my type tool, click out, and I'm gonna type the word no. Okay, now I'm gonna double click on that text up here, and I'm gonna change my font. I like for this one to use Impact, nice and bold. And then I'm gonna go ahead, you can do this a couple different ways. You can actually size up over here in your characters. That's probably maybe one of the easiest ways. I don't know that I recommend going out here and grabbing this. You can see sometimes it stretches. So I think sometimes it's best just to do it this way, or your hotkey is S on that layer, and you can, you can scale it that way. So another thing I like to do here is this window is not open, but I'm gonna go to Window and Align, and I can use this to center my, align my layer in the composition. The other thing is my anchor point here is in the center, or is not in the center. So I'm gonna go to Layer, Transform, Center Anchor Point, and Layer Content. And then that centers everything. That way if this spins, which we're not gonna actually do, it would spin around that point. So the word no, what do we wanna have this do? We want to have this thing. Actually, we're gonna animate some text. This is something new I just learned. And so what I'm gonna do is go into that text. I'm gonna twirl it down here in my layer. I'm gonna go to Animate, and I'm gonna go to Tracking, okay? Now the other thing we wanna do is go back over here to the right side, and we're gonna go to Paragraph. We're gonna set this as a centered, and that's gonna move everything, unfortunately. So I'm gonna go back here. I have to redo some things. Transform, center anchor point, layer content. The reason I do the paragraph centering is because that way when I do this tracking animation, that it splits it and I don't have to do more work. So you'll see what happens here. We're gonna go ahead down here to Animator 1. We added that tracking option. I'm gonna turn on the stopwatch for these. I think I do both generally. I think sometimes it just turns on both. And so I'm gonna say at this point, what do I want this to look like? At this point, I actually want these letters to be spaced apart outside the viewing box here. And then as he says the word no, I'm then gonna go ahead and drop this back down. All right, so keyframing is, you know, anytime you turn on a stopwatch, it's recording any changes. As long as you have 2 keyframes being created and you've made a change, you're gonna see that visually happen on screen. So now I'm just gonna go back and just kind of watch it. I'll hit play, spacebar. Okay, and that looks pretty good. Now the other thing I'm gonna do is have this word fade out. So I'm gonna, you know, advance a little bit with my playhead past where that word no stops, and then I'm gonna hit T for transparency, opacity, turn on my stopwatch, and I'm gonna say, okay, at this point look like this, but by the time you get to the next word being said, I'm gonna drop you to 0. And I always use this slider, that's just my way to work. Okay, now on this layer, I'm just gonna hit U. That's gonna open up anything that has keyframes on it, and then you know, you can do this at the end, but I'm gonna drag over all my keyframes. I'm gonna right click, go to keyframe assistant and easy ease just to smooth this out a little bit, and let's see what this looks like. All right, so that looks good. Now, because the word no really ends at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and do an end cut. So I'm gonna do option right bracket on that no layer. You can see it ends. That way, when I advance forward here and I start working with the word I or the letter I don't have any problems with it trying to type on that layer. And I'll show you a way to get around that too later. So now we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna type the letter I. Okay, this one, I'm actually gonna highlight. I'm gonna change this character to Courier. I just like it because the I has a top and bottom there. And I'm gonna go ahead and just scale that up a little bit. Okay. You can see down in my layer though, right here, the I starts at the beginning. I don't want it to start until here, right? So I'm gonna just trim that up. You can do an option left bracket. And then what I wanna do next, you know, you could get crazy and you can center everything if you wanted to, like not paragraph, but then go to your line and be like, okay, center this, etc. The big thing on this one is we actually have to do that again anyway. We're gonna go and move our anchor point. So our anchor point right here is at the bottom. I want this to be at the top because I'm gonna have this thing swing down in 3D space. So I'm gonna throw the letter A on that layer. That's gonna open up my anchor point, and I'm not gonna keyframe this, but I'm just gonna get it so that anchor point ends up at the top of the eye. And really what's gonna happen is your eye is gonna move to the anchor point, and then, okay, so I'm just kind of placing it at the top, and I'm just gonna pull the eye back on. Then you would have to maybe go back in and like realign stuff. Okay, but that looks good. Okay, and what we're gonna do here is we're also gonna go over to our layers. Now, one thing, you wanna make sure that this little option right here in the bottom left, that second option that says expand or collapse, the transfer controls pane is open. That gives you more options. I like having that open at all times. But I'm also gonna turn on this 3D cube for that layer I. And what this is gonna do is it's gonna give me a Z axis on everything. Specifically though, we're gonna mess with the X rotation right now. And so now you can see I can swing this thing, so I'm gonna undo that. And so at the beginning here, I'm gonna turn on the stopwatch for X rotation. I'm gonna say at that point, I want this to be fully invisible, kind of like flipped up. And then, you know, relatively quickly, that thing is gonna swing down and just drop into place. I think 0 would be the actual final placement there. I can type that in. So there I have 2 keyframes on X rotation. And so let's see. And that looks pretty good, I think, right? So I actually don't like the height of this. I'm gonna move this up just a little bit. All right, so there we go. The letter I is there. Now I'm gonna start getting into the I am your father part, right? So the am your, we're gonna do something kind of a little bit trickier with the I. So let's play this for a second. So the am kind of comes in around here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have the I actually rotate and get larger and reposition right after it swings down. So here I'm gonna go to R for rotation, and I'm gonna look for orientation, turn that on. I'm gonna go to P for position, turn on that one, and then S for scale. And I'm gonna hit U on that keyboard or on that layer to open up anything that has a keyframe created. So I'm saying at this point, look like this. By the time I start saying the am your stuff, what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna scale this thing up. I'm gonna rotate it using orientation. Let's see, is it, yeah, by Z orientation. The actual number 90 should get you perfect. And then we're gonna just move our position. And it's not big enough, so I'm gonna go ahead and scale that up again and move it. So basically just as long as you tell it where to be at that end point and like how you want it to look, you're good, right? So now it's saying after it swings down, it's gonna then rotate, get bigger. And so I use position, scale, and orientation on those, okay? So that's looking pretty good. Now we have the am your part, you know, coming up. I'm gonna go ahead to my type tool. This is kind of where you wanna be tricky. You can see my cursor right now wants to type on that eye layer. I gotta move away from it. So you might want to zoom out and just type above. So I'm gonna type the word am, and then I'm gonna just go ahead and pull it in. I'm gonna be a little bit lazy right now, and I'm gonna hold on shift, but I'm not gonna start the anchor point because I don't need to. It's not a big deal in this particular case. I'll trim up the am to where it should start. Okay, and then what I'm gonna do is Command D that layer and start the your slightly later, just a little stair stepper there. It's technically the same. Oops. Technically the same word, so I'm just gonna move it, double click it, switch it to your. Get it put into place here. And I need to be a little bit smaller. You can play around, you know, make it look good. Move this up too. Okay. And so now we have I am. Whoop. Okay, now that something happened there, right? I switched those. So, all right, that one actually needs to be there. That one needs to be a later start, right? I am your. And then the next part's gonna be a little bit tricky. So we're gonna go ahead. If you haven't saved, let's go ahead and save this. All right, next part gets a little bit tricky. And so what we're gonna do now is we are going to go up and we're gonna type the word father. Let's see where it says father. It's right here. And so I'm gonna type up, oops, you can see there I wanted to select the other word, so again, type up on screen, father. Okay, this one, I'm gonna go ahead and just bring it in. Okay, double click it. I'm gonna change this color to black. Just double click it, go to your picker, and okay, there's my word father. Now that layer, I'm gonna move it up just for ease of working here. Okay, and what I'm gonna do is now we're gonna turn all these things into 3D layers. So I'm gonna check everything as a 3D layer, except for my loops audio, and I'm gonna go to the word father here. And that's not going to start till, it actually doesn't matter where it starts. I'm going to start early. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to my positioning for that father. I'm going to change the Z. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to pull this word father super close to us. So it looks like it's getting bigger. What's actually happening is it's getting larger. And so I'm going to keep changing it until it moves in back of me. And I'll show you that in a second what that actually looks like. Okay, so I'm back to just seeing the am your. Next, I'm going to go to let's see, I'm gonna go to layer, new, and I'm gonna create a camera. And for this camera, we want to enable depth of field so we can get some blurriness in it. I'm gonna hit OK. And then I'm gonna go to layer, new, null object. And this null object, we're gonna click on, I'm gonna retitle it, hitting return, call it camera controller. Okay. And I'm gonna pick whip the camera to follow the controller. I'm also gonna make the camera controller 3D. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to this right side here. I'm going to save just real quick, change my two views. Okay, on this right side, you can see these blue things in the corner. That means I'm working with this window. This one, I want to change that camera to active camera. I'm going to click on the left side one, and I'm going to change that one to a top view. The problem will be is if this is set to default, sometimes it won't actually show what you're looking at. So you want your active camera to be set up. All right, from here, I'm just going to back out a little bit. I'm using my space bar to grab my hands so you can kind of see. So this little box down here, that really small one, is a representation of the camera looking at this. And you can see what the camera sees. This red line right here is actually the father text. Okay, these red lines right here are all this stuff. Our background, our I am your. Okay, and so what we're going to do now is we're going to keyframe our camera to move. And we're going to use the camera controller to do so. So I'm going to go ahead and hit P for position on that. I'm going to turn on my stopwatch. And we're saying basically at this part, let's kind of play it and see what it sounds like. So right here, as Darth Vader says father, we are going to say it right there. We want it to, look like this, but then by the time he gets done saying that, we're going to go ahead and move our position of our camera back. So watch what happens over here and watch what happens over there as I drag this Z axis, which is the depth on the piece. You can see our camera moving backwards. You can see my father text being exposed so that I can see the whole thing. So I'm going to keep pulling, and everybody's is going to be a little bit different. It really depends on how far you pulled your father text out. Okay, and so there's a depth here, right? And so we just pull this thing out so we can see the father text and the background stuff. Now you can see that my background solid got smaller, so I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to go to that red solid, hit scale, and I'm just going to scale this thing up so that it fills the entire screen. Okay, and it looks like position on that looks fine, pretty good. text just a little bit in. Okay. And so let's see what that looks like now. Right, and that looks good. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is I want to do a little blurring on here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go actually into my camera. I'm going to go into my camera options, and I'm going to go and mess with my aperture settings. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to move my play forward to where the father is viewable. I'm going to change my aperture setting to something really big. What aperture does is opens up the camera's settings so it has a lot of light coming in, and so things are harder to organize. And specifically, the stuff in the distance right now you can see becoming blurred, and that's what I want. Now, the thing I'm going to keyframe on here is focus distance. So I'm going to turn on the stopwatch for that. So once you have like something blurry and the father's maybe a little bit more on focus, you want to then go to your focus distance and watch what happens when I change this. You can see on this left side window, you see that white line that's moving. That is my focus distance line. So I want that to touch the father text. And right there. So that's what I'm looking for. And basically I'm just looking, does that look like it's in focus? Yes. So now I'm going to pull my playhead back to the beginning, and now you can see my focus distance is a little bit off the I am yours. So you can see it up here. That's the representation of that. I'm going to move that back just a little bit, just so it's touching that and everything's in focus. And so let's go back and watch this thing. If it's not playing with the audio, switch out of 2 views to 1 view.
No, I am your father.
And if it's glitching a little bit, it might just need to render through a couple times. The last part here is we are gonna have our we're gonna have something else happen because the video kind of gets a little bit crazy, and I want to have a Darth Vader helmet pop up, and I'm gonna do something called wiggle on there. Actually, what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna show you how to do just something on the father text with wiggle ROM. So one thing I'm even gonna do before that, let's go ahead and just hit U. So I just clicked off, I deselect, and if I hit U, it closes down all my layers. If I hit it again, and maybe I have all my layers selected or I don't, you can see it pulls up all my keyframes. And so one thing I'm gonna do here is just kind of click in this gray space, and I'm just gonna drag over all my keyframes and make sure those already have an easy ease on them. But I'm gonna right click over these and right click, and let me go to easy ease. So this all has like a little bit of a smoother look to it.
I am your father.
So the next thing, or the last thing I should say, is we're going to animate this father text. I'm going to close out everything with the U. I'm going to go to my father text. I'm going to go over to my effects and presets here, and we're going to look up wiggle. And so let's go ahead and we're going to use wiggle Rama on this. So I'm going to go ahead and drop on wiggle Rama. And let's see, I don't want any wiggling to happen at the beginning, so I'm just going to reset. Drop that into 0 at this point. Okay. The wiggle rotation. So here I have all these settings for wiggle Rama, and these are all keyframeable. So when this thing starts saying, I'm going to start keyframing. So I'm going to turn on all these settings, and I want this text to just pretty much wiggle like crazy. So now I'm going to go here. I'm going to say at that point, that one, you can see there's everything I turned on, and then by the time it gets to a little bit later in the video, I'm just going to mess with father text. Now, in some of my other videos, I do this with a PNG file that I bring in from rotation there. So I'm just kind of keyframing speed, nervousness, position, and ooh, I don't like that one either. Let's see these settings here. Now let's see what that looks like.
Father, say what?
And then maybe I even have that stop, right? Stop wiggling at some point, and we'll keyframe back over time. Okay.
Say what?
And then that's the end of this portion of the video. So I'm going to go ahead and put my play at the end here, and I'm going to hit the letter N, which is going to change my work area to N there. If everything looks good and you're ready to roll, you could export this. You could also go and right click in this little gray space and trim your comp to work area. Now this composition is reusable within another one. So say I was like, okay, I'm gonna go do the beginning of this thing now. I go to new composition. We'll call this one main. All right, I bring in my Luke is your father song on that one. The Luke I am, I'm gonna actually turn off the audio maybe. See what this happens. I'm gonna bring that one in. We're just gonna kind of place it where it needs to go. So now I gotta go to this one, hit LL, and I think it starts around here. So now I would just kind of time this up. So where does that no start?
No, I am the father.
And so this would be, if I was going to do some more animating for the beginning portion of this, I might make a new comp for, say, beginning of text. And then from here, you're able to export. We would go to File, Export, and add to Media Encoder Queue and send it out of Media Encoder's H264 file. And again, like once this video is done, I'm just going to hit End, and then we're good to go. And so there's a lot more that you can do with this. We can tie things together. You know, we can pre-comp stuff. You know, for instance, if I were to go back here, I could tie together. Let's see. Let's pull all this down. Maybe like the I am your could all be pre-comp. Command-Shift-C that, and that could also drop out or spin or whatever. So if I Command-Shift-C it, that makes a pre-comp for I am your. And then you can see this thing, and then I could have it maybe even before the father text comes in. I want to make that a 3D layer. There we go. Okay. Maybe as that pulls out, I can do a position keyframe on that whole group, that pre-comp, and I can even have it like just go up off screen. So let's see what that looks like there. And back to main and watch the whole thing.
No, I am the father. Say what?
And so you saw kind of what happened there. I think that actually moved off too fast. So I'd probably double click and go back and toy with that a little bit. Maybe I don't want it to actually fully go off screen. I'm not sure yet. You know, maybe it happens a little bit slower or something. All right. And that is it.